Hello and welcome to the channel. Welcome to this review slash overview of Codex Grey Knights for 9th edition Warhammer 40k, which is available for pre-order from Games Workshop for today, and you can get it next Saturday. Before we begin, a big thank you to Games Workshop for sending this through to me for free and to other social media type people out there so we can get our paws into it and then let you know what's inside the hallowed tome. This is not a full breakdown of everything that's in this book. There'll be plenty of that sort of stuff online. I like to get to the meat. So let's begin. And we begin with disappointment. I read this book wrong at the start. The first time I read it, I thought it was bad. And then I thought it was okay. And now I've finished reading it for like the third or fourth time. I think it's very good. So let me take you on that emotional roller coaster, starting off with the old days. Grey Knights used to get 1+1 to their psychic powers, and they would cast Smite, and it would be on a 4, then a 5, then a 6, and it would do 1 damage. Beforehand, in 8th edition, it wouldn't even go up. It would just do 1 damage, 1 damage, 1 damage. And the way to make them buff is to stick a captain in there, and a captain could make that 2 damage smites at 24-inch range. Well, that's gone. A captain is like a standard lieutenant now. A captain allows you to re-roll wound rolls of 1 with core units. A Grand Master allows you to re-roll hit rolls of 1 for core units. The Psychic Battery Captain has gone, and I found that a little upsetting at first because I tended to rely on that strategy. And they shall know no fear and bolted discipline, but they don't get combat doctrines either, like normal Space Marines do. So even though they've got lots of Storm Bolters throughout the army, they're not AP-1 Storm Bolters. So initially I thought they'd taken a bit of a nerf back, but of course that's surface level reading. All the models in here have got an extra wound. Strike Squads have finally got 2 wounds. Terminators have finally got 3 wounds, but Strike Squad Marines are 22 points and they'll die like normal Marines, and Terminators are 42 points and they'll die like normal Terminators with a 5+ invulnerable save. 42 points for a 5+ invulnerable save Terminator. It's 43 points for a standard Terminator with a Storm Shield, which will give a standard Terminator in the Space Marine book a 1+ save and a 4+ invulnerable save. So they're more squishy. Well, I was conflicted. And I was hoping for something for Paladins as well, because they're 47 points for 3 wound Terminators with a 5+ invulnerable save. Maybe they would get transhuman physiology like the Deathwing. No. Maybe they would get a 4+ invulnerable save. No. Maybe they will get an extra wound. No. So Paladins will die just the same as standard Terminators will die. Or at least the way standard Grey Knight Terminators are going to die. So, detachment abilities, what do Grey Knights do? And Grey Knights, well, there's restrictions on the models you can bring, Grandmasters and Brother Captains, just like there's restrictions for Captains and Demon Princes and Pharaons and in all the new books that we see right now. In each detachment, you can only bring 1 Grandmaster and 1 Captain. You can bring a couple of detachments if you want in your army, and then they gain the Aegis. And this is the special Grey Knight thing. Grey Knights have a 5+ ignore mortal wounds and add 1 to deny the witch tests. And I was like, oh no, 5+ ignore. Well, 5+ ignoring mortal wounds is quite nice because that will help them with perils, because they perils all the time because they're psychers, and it will help them when they get smitten back again. It also helps when vehicles explode next to you, or when there's weapons that do mortal wounds in addition. Ignoring those 5+ mortal wounds, that's nice, but nothing that helps them cast powers better. In fact, they've got a +1 to deny the witch tests. It means that they're more resilient against Psyker units because they can ignore mortal wounds coming in on a 5+, and they can help deny some of the Psyker stuff, Psyker armies going against them. But what about offense? Where is their offense? And then it struck me. That Grey Knights are back to doing D3 mortal wounds at 18-inch range. And every unit can cast Smite. Well, almost every unit. I mean, Land Raiders and Rhinos can't, but Dread Knights can, and Dreadnoughts can, and everything on foot can. You've got an army of Psychers, a Brotherhood of Psychers, and you're going to be casting Hammerhand, Gate of Infinity, the psychic powers that Grey Knights do, and you're going to be smiting and doing D3 mortal wounds and D3 mortal wounds. If you drop in, teleport away, yes, you'll cast on a 5, then a 6, then a 7. You'll be doing D3 mortal wounds, then D3 mortal wounds, then and that's particularly powerful. That's an extra shooting attack that Grey Knights have. It'll drop off a quick cliff quite quickly because it's hard to cast on 9s and 10s, but it's that extra psychic shooting attack that you have. So then I look through the books for ways to buff it, And is there something in there that allowed them to re-roll psychic tests or add one to their psychic tests or this, that, and the other? I couldn't find anything obvious except for there's a 2 CP stratagem called Psychic Locus, and you use this stratagem at the start of your psychic phase. You select a brother captain model from your army, and every psychic unit within 6 inches, Brotherhood of Psychic units, add 1 to psychic tests taken for that unit. So you get smite of 4, 5, 6. Psychic Locus, 2 CP. There's also a stratagem called Psychic Channeling, which allows you to roll 3d6 when taking a psychic test and discard the lowest. There's also a stratagem actually called Hexagrammic Wards, which allow you to roll 3d6 when taking a Deny the Witch test and discard the lowest. Then the last thing I can find that could help with psychic tests is for a character only, once per battle. You can give them the Gem of Inuktu, it costs 15 CP, and then once per battle, when that character casts psychic powers in that phase, they can add 2 to their attempts. Apart from those things mentioned, I can't find anything else in here that helps Grey Knights pass psychic tests. They get +1 to deny, but not +1 to cast, and precious few little ways to help them cast. But they have a lot of psychic powers to choose from, and everyone's a psyker. So I can see why they didn't. If there was a go-to thing in here which really helps them cast psychic powers, or a relic, or a warlord trait, or something, then people would pick that one all the time. But with all the things that they can do with their psychic powers, and the fact that every unit can chuck out D3 mortal wounds in the psychic phase, it would be a bit OP. It would be a bit OP if everyone had +1 to cast or reroll casting or something like that. So instead you get a 5-up feel no pain to mortal wounds, you get a -1 to deny the witch test. They've got bolted discipline, they've got ant nation or no fear, almost everything can teleport in, and then they have Masters of the Warp. Masters of the Warp are 5 tides. You pick a tide, and that tide is in effect for the battle unless you change it. Changing it is a psychic test which you need to pass on a 4-up, and then you can change from one tide to another one in your psychic test. Now, the question is, do you want, it's only a 4+ to cast, but what if you fail? What if it gets blocked? Now, the defensive one in here, Tide of Shadows, this was all from the Psychic Awakening book. There were 3 tides before, but now there's 5. The Tide of Shadows gives you light cover so long as you're more than 12 inches away. That will count to vehicles as well. So +1 to your armor save if you're more than 12 inches away. If the unit is already receiving the benefits of light cover, it gains dense cover. So an infantry unit in a ruin will get light cover and -1 to hit, dense cover. So that's quite nice. That's quite a defensive one to go in turn 1. Okay, I'll give all of my army a +1 armor save. I'll give all of my army that happens to be in cover, dense cover as well. That will apply to vehicles. And then you've got Tide of Banishment. That's the one that you pull out if you're fighting demons. So they are the Demon Slayers Space Marines. Once Time of Banishment is unlocked, you reroll all hit rolls of 1 and reroll all wound rolls of 1 against demons. Your whole army rerolls hits and wounds against demons. Awesome. Very situational, but it will come into effect when you're fighting Death Guard or Thousand Suns or Chaos or things like that. They have demon engines, they have demon princes. Then there's Tide of Celerity. Every time you advance, you count a 1 and 2 on the dice roll as a 3. And every time you charge, you count a 1 and 2 on the dice roll as a 3. That's nice. It gets you into the battle quicker. Then there's Tide of Escalation. Now, Tide of Escalation means if you've got a Brotherhood of Psychers detachment in your army, you can recast the same psychic power that's already been cast. A word on this for a moment. There are 2 psychic disciplines in here. There's the Dominus discipline, and the Dominus discipline is the psychic powers like Gate of Infinity, Vortex of Doom, Sanctuary, the ones that you can throw out all over the place that your librarian or your captain or your chapter master might have. The Sanctic discipline, Hammer Hand, Astral Aim, Purge Soul, Purifying Flame. The Sanctic discipline affects the psychic unit, the unit that's casting the power. So for example, the troops in here, your Strike Squads and Terminators, they have Hammer Hand. They know Smite, they know Hammer Hand. And your jumpy dudes, the Interceptors, they have Ethereal Castigation. After they've moved, they can shoot some guns and then they can move again. Armored Resilience for your Dreadnoughts. Armored Resilience on a 6-up, you add 1 to saving throws made for the Dreadnought. Now, the thing about the Sanctic discipline is the units in the book that have Sanctic powers, it tells you what Sanctic powers they have with the exception of Paladins. Paladins can pick any two. It tells you what sanctic powers they have. Or the Librarian, actually. The Librarian can pick any two. But apart from them, what have the Romans ever done for us? Apart from those two units, the units that have access to the sanctic disciplines have specific sanctic powers, and you can cast them more than once. So if you've got a strike squad that's casting Hammerhand on a 5-up, you can then point at another unit and cast Hammerhand on a 6-up, and then you can point at another unit and cast Hammerhand on a 7-up. The sanctic discipline you can cast more than once, just like you can cast Smite more than once, and it goes up by 1 every time you cast them. Back to the Tide of Escalation that we were just talking about. When the Tide of Escalation is in effect, the psychic power that's unlocked for your Brotherhood, you can also cast that more than once. You can cast it, and that will go up by 1. What are Brotherhoods, I hear you ask? Well, there's 8 Brotherhoods to choose from. You arrange your detachments into Brotherhoods. You could bring an army, and they're all part of one Brotherhood, or you could bring an army with 2 detachments in, say a spearhead and a battalion, or a patrol and an X, or a Y, or a Z. Whatever you want to do, you put them all into Brotherhoods. And the Brotherhood thing, there's 8 of them to pick from, and they unlock a psychic power that your whole army knows. Not your whole army, the units in that detachment know. So if your whole army is from one Brotherhood detachment, then they all know that power from that Brotherhood. If your army is in 2 different detachments, then the ones in detachment X all know that power in addition, and the ones from detachment Y all know that Brotherhood power in addition. So for example, your strike squads and your terminators, they know Smite and Hammerhand, and if they're in a Brotherhood detachment, they'll know the Brotherhood psychic power as well. There are 8 Brotherhoods. There are 8 psychic powers to choose from. In each of the 8 Brotherhoods, there's also a stratagem that you can choose from. And in each of the 8 Brotherhoods, there's also a Warlord trait to choose from. So for example, there's a psychic power in one of the Brotherhoods. That means you can re-roll charges. If your whole army is from that Brotherhood, then everything in your army that has access to the Brotherhood psychic power has access to that psychic power, and suddenly you have a Grey Knight's army that can re-roll charges. And that's a war charge value of 6. And remember, it goes up. You could point at that one unit at Terminators, and they'll cast it on a 6. And then you point at that strike squad over there, and they'll cast it on a 7. And then you've got a free re-roll charge, a free re-roll charge. So long as you pass that psychic test for that unit. Remember, they won't be doing Smite. Though instead of Smite or Hammerhand, they'll be doing this one instead. There's a psychic power that allows you to reroll charges. There's a psychic power that gives the Psychers unit, everyone in the unit, +1 attack, which is quite nice because you can get Paladins, basic Paladins, up to 6 attacks each. Paladins come with 4 attacks. Get a pair of Falchions, 5 attacks. Cast this psychic power on them, 6 attacks. 10 Paladins charging in, that's 60 attacks. Paladins hit on 2s, normal Terminators hitting on 3s. There's a lot of attacks all of a sudden. So that's what the Brotherhood thing does. It unlocks a psychic power that you can lock in, and there's far too many to go through here. The idea is you basically pick a detachment and you stick them all in a Brotherhood because you want to unlock certain stratagems or certain psychic powers for that Brotherhood. So Grey Knights can recast the same psychic power from their Brotherhood so long as the Tide of Escalation is in effect, and they can recast the same psychic power from the Sanctic Discipline. You can't do that with the Dominus Disciplines for Gates of Infinity, Vortex of Doom, things like that. So that's a nice little thing right there. They've got Bolter Discipline, they've got combat squads, they can teleport in, they can smite away, and then they've got these tides that they pick from. And then we get to Tide of Conversion. Tide of Convergence is add 6 inches to the range of psi weapons that the models in the unit are equipped with for your psi cannons and P silencers, things like that. You're not that interested in that part of the bullet point. The second part of the bullet point, though, is amazing. Each time a model in this unit makes a melee attack with a nemesis weapon and an unmodified wound roll of 6, the target suffers 1 mortal wound in addition to any normal damage. Okay, so let me beat this drum loudly because I think this is pretty significant. They've given an army the ability to do mortal wounds in close combat for free. Grey Knights were always the choppy army. They have problems with long-range Daka. If you want to add long-range Daka in a Grey Knight army for cheap, for cheap, you bring in Razorbacks, you bring in Dreadnoughts. That's what you used to bring, and that's what you're still bringing. If you want to pay more points for a long-range DAC, then you bring in Storm Ravens, Storm Talons, Land Raiders, things like that. Long-range DAC isn't where they excel, and all other Space Marines can do that as well. Where Grey Knights excel is their whole army has Nemesis Force weapons. Their whole army cuts through armor. In close combat, Grey Knights have always been terrifying. Falchions give you +1 attack. Regardless if you've got 1, 2 or 16 falchions on your model, they get an extra attack and it's damage 1. But swords and halberds are damage 2. And when you attack now, if the Tide of Convergence is in effect, 6 is to wound, do mortal wounds in addition. So everything infantry in this army has the potential, not only are they hitting you with power weapons, force weapons, nemesis weapons that cut through armor, there's AP -2 or AP -3, then they're also doing mortal wounds in addition. And the basic infantry in this list has the ability to re-roll wounds, hammer hand, and they can all cast it on a 5, then a 6, then a 7. So you're going to get charged. Let's say you're the opponent now. You're going to get charged by 5 Strike Squad. Strike Squads have a base 3 attacks now. You don't have Shock Assault. It's all tied in. Strike Squad have 3 attacks, Terminators have 3 attacks, Paladins have 4 attacks. There's no Shock Assault in this army. Shock Assault is turned on all the time. Let's say these 5 Strike Squads all have pairs of falchions, so they've got 4 attacks each. So there's 5 models attacking you. That's 20 attacks, and they're hitting on 3s. And with Hammer Hand turned on, they're going to be wounding on 4s, but re-rolling. What will happen is you'll get a number of 6s, and then you'll pick up the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6s and re-roll them, because you can re-roll wounds with Hammer Hand. It doesn't say passed or failed, it says re-roll wounds. And you're going to be trying to maximize the number of 6s that you can get out. And Math Hammer-wise, 20 Strike Squad guys, 5 Strike Squad guys doing this attack is going to do 6 mortal wounds. And that's just 5 dudes. That's if you're re-rolling with Hammer Hand. That is just a standard Strike Squad team. So that's what Grey Knights do. They haven't got Shock Assault. They haven't got the Combat Doctrine thing, AP -1, AP minus. But the whole army can smite and will be doing mortal wounds to you at range in the psychic phase, as well as hurting you in the shooting phase. And then in close combat, they're going to be beating the crap out of you with AP -2 or 3 power weapons that do 1 or 2 damage, and they're going to be doing mortal wounds in addition. They've made Grey Knights a bit more choppy. Add that to the they're more choppy now, and they already were pretty choppy. They've got a bunch of wounds back because they've now got 2 wounds, 3 wounds. They're tougher than they were. Grey Knights now are a bit tougher because they've got more wounds and a bit more choppy in close combat. And that's all you really need to know about the Grey Knight Codex. It's very good. I'd say very good, but not broken. I'd say it brings them up to 9th edition power level. The extra wounds across the army gives them the resilience that they needed, and the Tide of Convergence, this mortal wound output in close combat, gives them more punch that they needed as well. Question is, can they compete with other 9th edition armies? Don't know. Need to play the test the crap out of it and find out. The other question is, do you bother staying in Tide of Shadows in turn 1 and then changing the Tide on a warp charge value of 4 into one of the more offensive powers, Tide of Celerity, to get you there quicker, or the Tide of Escalation so you can do more Brotherhood powers? Do you just stick with one of the Tides straight away? Because I've got a sneaking suspicion in there are things out there that can stop psychic powers dead. There are things out there that can deny it on a 4 up. There's a Warlord trait in the Deathwing thing that you can just go, nah, to a psychic power and stop it dead. So if you started off in a defensive Tide and then in turn 2 tried to switch your Tide to an offensive Tide, and your opponent has the ability to shut that down, it might be worth considering just staying in the offensive Tide all the way through the battle and not bother with the warp shaping psychic power. Remember as well, to change the Tide, you need the warp shaping psychic power, so you need a Psyker, that's going to be one of your Grandmasters or a Captain or a Librarian that can change it for you, and that takes up another psychic power that chap could have had. So let's boil this book down a little bit more and look at offensive capability while we're talking about offensive capability. Vortex of Doom, closest enemy unit within 12 inches, does 2d3 mortal wounds to that unit. You need a 7 to cast. 2d3. pretty pokey. 7 to cast, kind of sucks. You're going to want your captain nearby. There is a Psychic Epitome warlord trait that you can do, and your Psyker either points at himself or a unit within 6 inches, and they add 1 to mortal wound output. So if he pointed to himself when he did Vortex of Doom, it'd be 2d3 plus 1 mortal wounds on the output. And then he could smite, and that would be a d3 mortal wounds plus 1 for Psychic Epitome, or throw it out on another core unit within 6 inches. All the Grandmasters and Captains can only do 1 power, but you can spend 1 CP for Mental Focus, and then you select 1 Grey Knight Psychic unit from your army, and then they can attempt to manifest 1 more Psychic power. So you can Vortex of Doom, and you can Smite, and you can add 1 to each of those Whipfire things with that Warlord trait, and you can add 1 to the cast if you spend another 2 CP on Psychic Locus for the Captain. This is going to be a very CP heavy army. More offensive output for 1 CP, Psychic Onslaught, add 1 to the strength characteristics and add 1 to the AP of psi weapons that you're shooting out with. That would be good for a Dread Knight. A Dread Knight have both of those in the heavy forms, and it's 1 CP and both of those weapons, add 1 strength, add 1 AP. I like that. But there's also defensive capabilities in here as well. True Silver Armor is the Grey Knight Transhuman Physiology. It costs 2 CP for a unit of 5 or less. 3 CP if you want to put it on a large unit of Terminators, anything with 6 models or more. But it's nice to have that ignore wounds on a 1, 2, 3. Or you could put Haloed in Soul Fire on the turn when a unit teleports onto the battlefield for 1 CP, -1 to hit that. That's -1 to hit them whether they shoot at them or charge them. Haloed in Soul Fire for 1 CP lasts until your next turn. I like Fight on the Move. This costs 1 CP. When a Grey Knight teleporter unit from your army falls back, it can still shoot and charge. And that's your interceptors jumping around all over the place. But you can, for 10 CP, put a teleporter unit on a Dread Knight. And so Dread Knights will have the ability to fall back, shoot and charge for 1 CP. You've got to spend the 10 CP for the teleporter to begin with. Oh, talking about Dread Knights, they always used to have a 5-up invulnerable save. Now they just have a 4-up invulnerable save. And they've got an extra wound. 13 wounds, 4-up invulnerable save. A Dread Knight is the same points cost, tooled up, is the same points cost as a Warglaive, Invictor Warglaive, a Space Marine Invictor Warglaive. 160 points? Whatever. Invictor Warglaive and a Dread Knight is around the same points. And they both have toughness 6 and they both have 13 wounds. And they both have the same amount of offensive output on average, but the Invictor Warsuit can forward deploy. The Dread Knight, with the same amount of toughness, the same amount of wounds, the same amount of points, can teleport in, no smite, knows Hammerhand, and has got a 4-up invulnerable save. They want you to buy Dread Knights in case you haven't got one already. If you're a Grey Knight player, you've already got 3, so you're fine. And the best thing about Dread Knights is the massive Sword of Doom finally does something. The Nemesis Greatsword. The Nemesis Greatsword is a 15-point upgrade and gets them up to Strength 10, -3, d6 damage. That's nice. But they can do Sweeping Blow, so that means they get twice as many attacks. They have 5 attacks as standard, and then 4, then 3. But 5 attacks, that'd be 10 attacks at Strength 6, -2, 2 damage. Remember, you can increase the attacks output of a Nemesis Dread Knight by casting a Psychic Power on them. A Grand Master has 6 attacks, so that'd be 12 attacks with a Sweeping Blow at Strength 6, -2, 2 damage. If you increase this attacks characteristics by 1 with that spell, that'd be 14 attacks hitting on 2s at Strength 6, -2, 2 damage with a 4-up invulnerable save. And they can teleport in now. Now you used to have to pay for that upgrade, and for 10 points more, they can shunt out of a fight and still fight, charge and move, or they can shunt all the way across the battlefield. I think that's 2 CP, that other one, mid-game if you need them to. Yes, teleportation shunt. Select a Grey Knight teleporter unit from your army. Instead of making a normal move, move them anywhere, so long as they end up more than 9 inches away from an enemy unit. Okay, so the stratagems are very interesting. Their offensive output in close combat for the Grey Knights is very interesting. Their offensive output in the shooting phase, not so much, or rather around where it used to be, which means, yeah, it's not so much. You want something in the backfield supplying you with some long-range fire support as you move in. The amount of spells you can call on now is huge. There's 6 in the Dominus discipline, 6 in the Santic discipline, and 8 available to you through the Brotherhoods. That's 20 spells, people. 20. I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of warlord traits and the chaplain abilities of the relics because there's so much to talk through. Nothing in there really stands out. There is First of the Fray. First of the Fray has changed, so it's +1 to advance and charge instead of reroll charges. That's a nice warlord trait. We won't go down the whole rabbit hole. One of the relics that I do want to highlight, which I really like, is Sigil of Exigence. Once per battle in your opponent's shooting phase, when the bearer is selected as the target of a ranged attack, you can basically pick him up and put him anywhere on the battlefield more than 9 inches away from an enemy unit. So the enemy says, I'm going to target that guy. You pick him up, you move him. The enemy does not lose its shots. It says the enemy can now shoot at another target instead. But in turn 1, this could potentially allow you to put a model in your opponent's stable quarter. Just zip him across the battle grid. Or in turn 4 or turn 5, when the guy's on 1 or 2 wounds left, it could allow you to pick up that model and put it back in the back corner on an objective somewhere. Sigil of Exigence is basically a free teleport when they get targeted. I like that one. It's probably worth pointing out that paladins hit on 2s and they have 4 attacks. If you give them a pair of falchions, 5 attacks. You put a Brotherhood an ancient guy, the guy with a banner next to them, 6 attacks. You cast Symphonic Strike from the Rapier's Brotherhood on them and they get an extra attack, 7 attacks. So now you're looking at a model with 7 attacks, 4 plus the falchions, 5 plus the banner, 6 plus Symphonic Strike, 7. 5 of these guys, 35 attacks, hitting on 2s. And then let's say you're re-rolling wounds and any 6s to wound do mortal wounds in addition. Yeah, it's probably worth pointing that one out. It's just the delivery system. It's just getting them there. But that's been the Grey Knight puzzle all along. You have to, when you're facing a Grey Knight army that's coming straight for you, is you have to kill at least half of it before it hits your lines, because half of a Grey Knight's army, when it hits your lines, could kill all of your army. That's what it used to be able to do, and with these upgrades, this is what it'll be able to do again. At least I think so. We'll see. That's what it feels like. Another thing, interceptors move 12 now. They can move through models and terrain that they weren't, as though they weren't there. They've lost their shunt ability. That's that 2 CP stratagem now. But interceptors are still moving 12. Dread Knights are moving 9. Their movement and ballistic skill goes down as they degrade. Their weapon skill always stays the same. And then lastly, there's 12 things that you can pay for your characters. 12 upgrades, and they cost between 10 and 30 points each. And you can only give 1 to a character, and you can't give more than 1 to a character. So you could pay 20 points for this upgrade on that character and 30 points for this upgrade on that character, between 10 and 30 points each. All of these upgrades are once per battle things. These upgrades are the Wisdom of the Prognosticars. So for example, you can give one of your characters the Servants of the Throne upgrade, and it costs 20 points to give this to a character. Say you give this to a Dread Knight character, your Supreme Grandmaster Dread Knight dude, 20 points. Once per battle, when the bearer is selected as the target of an attack, it can use this gift. If it does, then until the end of the turn, the bearer has a 3+ invulnerable save. That's a once per battle thing, or for example, for 30 points, a Severance Bolt. Once per battle, you can shoot at a character, you ignore the Lookout Sir rule, and you do D3 mortal wounds to the thing that you just shot. And if it's a Psyker, you roll 3d6, and if the result of that dice roll exceeds the Psyker's leadership, be it Mortarion, be it whoever, you pick a psychic power that they know, and they can no longer cast it. There's 12 of these to pick from. They cost points. You can upgrade your characters with this as well. What about playing match play? What about your chapter approved rules, your secondaries? Well, there's a nice one here called Purge the Enemy if you go up against Thousand Suns, Death Guard, Chaos, anything with a demon in it. Essentially, you'll get a point every demon unit you kill. You'll get 3 points every demon vehicle or monster that you kill. You know, those annoying plague drones or blight haulers or a defiler or anything with the demon keywords, it's a vehicle or a monster, demon prints, 3 points. 1 point for killing your demon unit, 3 points for them. You get 5 points if you take out Mortarion or Magnus. That's the one you'll be picking if you go against Chaos armies. There's a Warpcraft one that you can pick as well, where you need to spend where you need to cast spells on objectives, and the more spells that you cast on objectives, the more psychic actions that you complete, the more points you can get. But I can't see anyone bringing this one, because if you're casting spells on these objectives here, there and everywhere, then you're not doing anything with that unit other than that psychic action, and you really need that unit in a Grey Knight, in an Elite Force, doing killy stuff or doing other stuff. You don't want it just standing there doing a psychic action, and psychic actions can be blocked. Ultimately, the ideal secondary that you'll be taking for Grey Knights is Oath of Moment, because you're going forward through the middle anyway. That's what they do, bulldozing everything out of their path. Okay, there's a real danger of being lost in the weeds here, so I will wrap it up there. Ultimately, what this codex does is make Grey Knights do what they do better, and they have more of it, more options and doing it better. That's what we like to see in a new codex. How resilient they'll be with the stratagems that can help keep them alive, not sure. But one of the ways to guarantee resilience is to guarantee offensive output, to ensure that there's less stuff coming back at you. And I think they've definitely got a lot more offensive output. So that might be the trade-off there. So here's hoping that the little bit of killy adds up to a hell of a lot more of resilience for them. That is ensuring that you can get that killy off. A canny general fighting against them might be able to resist the killy, escape the killy, or be tough enough to take it. We'll see. We'll see how it plays out in the meta. Anyway, as I said, I want to wrap it up there. Don't want to get lost in all the details. I like to do these reviews and highlight the main things, the things that stand out to me. And the main thing that stands out to me for Grey Knights is we now have an army whose basic troops choices do mortal wounds in close combat. On 6 to wound, they do mortal wounds on close combat. That seems to be huge to me. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this review/overview. If you'd like to support me, if you'd like to get more content from me, and if you'd like to join my wonderful community, then consider subscribing to deploymentzone.tv. Happy wargaming!